Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. Yeah, it's another Tim May podcast. And I've got one of my favorite co-pilots ever in that right seat today with me, Joshua Perry. Joshua Perry, welcome back to the Tim May podcast.
Always a pleasure to be on the show. I wait for the invite to come through.
Yeah.
As long as I'm up on my feet and good to go, I'm here.
Yeah, as long as you're not getting intravenous fluids, you're going to come on, right? I mean, that's what I love about you. It's a mash unit we're running here, ladies and gentlemen. But speaking of that, let's just jump right into the news of the week. I was going to say news of the day. You and I are recording this on Monday afternoon, Columbus time, and of course, C.J. Stroud has already announced that he is going to the NFL as the late great Hayden Fry, head coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes, and before that, SMU and North Texas State would have said, what a surprise. But the bottom line is, even though there was all this conjecture going on, all this hope and belief that an Ohio State NIL, some kind of NIL thing could pop up, or some kind of like sponsorship deal could pop up to lure him back to college football for one more year, Joshua, is my contention. I said this on TV and other places. You don't want to get into a bidding war with the National Football League, number one. You know what I mean? They're the people that don't hold up their paddle until the end and go 10 million. You know what I mean? At an auction. But the bottom line is that this is kind of the way things should flow in the modern day college football world, right? I mean, this guy has done his thing. He's a top 5 candidate for the 2023 NFL draft, maybe even the number one guy. Is there enough team camaraderie and loyalty to lure these guys back anymore?
No, and this is the thing too for CJ is I think there was a realistic conversation he had internally about his legacy and what coming back for another year could potentially mean for him just in, the history books and
Yeah.
being able to come back to Columbus and he could just live his life as CJ Stroud for the rest of his life. Now, are you willing to turn down $30 million guaranteed right now to do that? And I think it would be a bit of a foolish trade-off, but I think the way that he played against Georgia, he saw the narrative start to change on him, deservedly so. He's a guy who hadn't beaten Michigan as a starter, never played in a Big Ten championship game, doesn't have a college football playoff win. All those things matter to athletes, but at the end of the day, if you're looking at this from a rational point of view, if you're thinking about this logically, you can't turn the money down, nor should he. And so for him, I'm first off proud of him in the way that he's handled himself throughout his career at Ohio State, and I know that he will handle himself well as he turns pro. But you said it. This guy is going to be one of the first quarterbacks taken, potentially a top 5 draft pick. It's really hard, really, really hard to say that you're going to push that opportunity back another year with so many unknowns in the equation. So it was a moment for CJ. He ended off giving his best for Buckeye Nation. And I know a lot of us appreciate that. And I'm excited to see what his career looks like now that he's going to be a pro.
Yeah, I was going to say, how many drop the mic moments do you get too? I mean, yeah, he didn't beat Michigan in 2021, but oh my goodness, the Rose Bowl, greatest bowl game ever played by a quarterback. Of course, it helped having Jackson Smith and Jigba on the other end of that. We'll get to that in a moment. But then number 2, dude, the performance, and you were there, just like I was in Atlanta, the performance he put on in that, where he literally said, we're not going to lose. They did end up losing. But the bottom line is he put the team on his back and said, okay, you've taken my tight end away. You've taken the best receiver in the country away. I'm going to run the ball now. You know what I mean? I'm going to show you, yes, I can do whatever it takes to win a game, and almost got it done. That was a drop the mic moment in my, you don't, like George Costanza, you don't get very many of those, right? And from Seinfeld. So this was always a no-brainer for me that he was going to leave, just based on what he showed in that game. Why you should consider him, in my opinion, ahead of Bryce Young, because he can do everything Bryce Young can do, but he's bigger and taller and whatever you want to call it,
Yeah,
And then,
he's got a bigger arm too.
yeah. And then Will Levis, I mean, Will Levis isn't in the conversation for me. I think that's just thrown in there to give conjecture, but where do you see him stacked up against those 3, Joshua?
Yeah, I mean, he would be my QB1. I don't have a problem with people saying that Bryce Young would be their QB1. I think
Oh,
it's a
I like
matter of
him.
preference.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Bryce gives you more in the athleticism department than CJ certainly would, although I think we saw what CJ can do with his legs when he needs to. CJ is your prototypical pro style quarterback, though, about 6'3",
Yeah.
220 pounds or so. He's got a big arm, makes all the throws. You know that he's a guy who likes to navigate from the pocket, but when the pocket breaks down, we see that he has a movement skill to extend plays and to find the receivers downfield. Both of those guys are going to have an adjustment curve because they were playing with some of the best receivers in college football. When you get to the NFL, the playing field is going to be leveled. So I think you have to take that into your evaluation with both of them.
Yeah.
For me, my knock on Bryce Young and why I would have CJ as my QB1 is what you mentioned in terms of size. He's not a tall quarterback, which isn't a deal breaker, although that would be my preference if I was a GM. It's his frame it's small. So you have to be comfortable with the fact that your quarterback probably get banged up a little bit easier than some of these other guys out here. And I think Will Levis, with all of his measurables, is the reason why he's getting so much hype. He's drawing Josh Allen comps. I personally don't see it the same way, but he's got a big arm. We've seen him make big-time throws.
Yeah.
I think his decision-making is absolutely wild, though.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a bit of a problem as you head into the NFL. And then for me, it's not just the measurables. Have you displayed that you're a quarterback who has a complete game, you're well-developed, but you're not totally tapped out to where you can't develop more on the next level? And I think CJ gives you some of that upside. The reason people would say that a CJ or a Bryce Young doesn't give you as much upside as a Will Levis is because they're just more developed players. But that's not a knock because there's still upside with both of them. So this QB thing is going to be really interesting. And then the name we didn't even throw in there, Anthony Richardson out of Florida. And I know people are going to be enamored with him and his movement skill. The guy is such an underdeveloped passer. And I know people talk about one of our former Buckeyes and Justin Fields and his passing game. Justin was a great passer on the college level, and there's still a learning curve when you get in the league. You take a guy like Richardson, who wasn't even a great passer on the college level, and you want to try to work with that. To spend a first-round pick on a guy like that, I think would be absolutely wild. So to me, when you're talking about quarterbacks in this class, there are two guys that I would feel comfortable with taking high in the draft, and the rest of them are projects for me that I wouldn't spend a first-round pick on.
Yeah. Hey, real quick before we move on from that, what's your take on Stetson Bennett? Now that you've seen him perform live, now that you got to talk to him, I'm sure you did down in Atlanta. You talked to everybody else, didn't you?
I'm doing Tim May.
You even acted like you knew me, which I appreciate that. My take on Stetson Bennett is he Brock Purdy? Is he what? I mean, this guy, when the chips are on the table, man, he's drawing in the pot. I'm trying to think of a good gambling analogy. I mean, this guy, when the play has to be made, has made the play the last couple of years and stuff. Yeah, he's a sort of a smallish guy. He's 25 years old, but I would take him in the third or fourth or fifth round as my backup quarterback because I know he's going to study. I know he's going to be in the game, and I know he's not going to go away even when I swat him, which is what Georgia did like 3 times. He stuck around, and all he did was win them 2 straight national championships. And believe me, he was huge in those games, both of those national championship games. Just what's your take on him? Would you, as an NFL guy, would you take a guy like that and put him somewhere?
3rd or 4th round. I think that he would be that would be a good value for him. I don't see him as a longtime NFL starter. I do see him as a guy who could start in case of emergency as a backup and would go out there and manage the game properly. One of the things that I see out of him, and I know that winning isn't a quarterback stat, but he played winning football. And I think that you can look at that as a stat for quarterbacks. Did you do things to put your team in a great position? Like the other people got to step up. Like I would say to kind of make this analogy whole, CJ Stroud played winning football against Georgia. They didn't win the football game, right? So you can play winning football, and it's not just on the quarterback. Stetson Bennett plays winning football. Does he have the biggest arm? No. Is he the biggest player out there? No. Does he make good decisions with the football? Yes. Is he going to be generally accurate? Yes. Does he add you that element of, okay, the play is breaking down, it's on me, and now I got to go get it? Yes. And is he fearless when he does it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think you need guys like that in your locker room, especially when you know that you're not counting on them to go out there and be your QB1. And then here's the other thing that I don't think people really take into account when they start to look at these quarterbacks is there's a value to having a guy, like you said, who you know is going to study, a guy who's going to show up every day, but also somebody's given a look in practice. Like he's splitting reps with the first team quarterback, and he's going to work in and get the game plan down. But when they're running scout team, you're seeing the backup quarterback looking at the card and running the plays.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is a very valuable spot on an NFL roster. And so for me, I think he has earned himself in that conversation. I think probably third, fourth round. You said fifth round. I'd be totally cool with that. He's better than a Mr. Irrelevant. He's not an undrafted free agent. This is a draftable quarterback who I think could be valuable to an NFL franchise.
Hey, real quick, the only guy who who stepped out from Ohio State, stepped into the draft, who surprised me, didn't stun me, but surprised me a little bit, was Luke Whippler, the center.
Yeah.
I thought, man, number one, I think he's pretty good. Number two, I think he could be the Remington favorite going into this coming season, but there's still some stuff maybe I want to see from him and stuff. But I don't know. Did that catch you a little bit by surprise, or what? What's your just take on him? I know you study. You guys study at the Big Ten Network. Y'all study all kinds of stuff. You know what I mean? But just what's your take on that one before we move on here?
Yeah, I think the biggest question that was probably looming in his mind is, even with national awards and maybe some more development on the collegiate level, does his draft value go up that much to say that it's worth returning? And I think he's one of those guys who realizes that even if he plays better than he did this year, he probably is what he is a little bit. And so it makes sense to go at that point. It was one of the dilemmas that I had when I was coming out, and I never seriously considered leaving after the 2014 season. But there was this conversation that I had in my head of, if I come back for one more year, does that really change who I am as a player? Like, am I going to get that much better that my draft stock goes up? I think I was, going to be a fourth round pick after 2014. I was a fourth round pick after 2015. That was kind of what it is. And so sometimes you see guys make a decision by saying, the 1 year coming back does not really improve my draft stock to a point where it makes it worth it. It was Blake Corum basically at Michigan, where he decided to come back not to improve his draft stock, because I think he is a mid-round pick regardless. It's not a knock on the kid. I think he's a phenomenal player, but he's a running back and he is what he is in terms of his size and everything. He came back because he wants to be a legend at Michigan. And so that was a part of his paradigm. But him coming back, this is not for the draft stock. It's not to say that he's going to become, a second round pick or a late first round pick rather than maybe a third or fourth round pick from coming back. It's just what he wanted to do personally. And I think a lot of athletes have to have that serious conversation at the end of the year. So many guys who you just are what you are. And there's only so many slots in the first and second round that you got to say, am I realistic in saying that I can improve my draft stock to a point where it's going to add that much more value to my career? Yeah. And then the other thing too is getting in there a year early. You hit free agency a year younger for that second contract. Like, you got a little bit more life left in you, and that's a part of the equation too.
Yeah, absolutely. There are all kinds of things staring at you. But like for a guy like Blake Corum, dude, I mean, he should be able to make as much in some kind of NIL hookup as he would make as a third or fourth round draft pick minimum, right?
So the numbers that they're throwing around right now for Blake Corum is about $1.5 million to $2 million, and what type of package they would like to give to him over the course of this next year.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at a third or fourth round pick, signing bonus is going to be somewhere in the million all the way down to maybe the high 600, 700,000 range, plus rookie salary coming in to be in the 800 range. So it's about the same that he would make in year one.
Push. Yeah.
And so, that's a part of the financial equation there too.
Hey, Josh, real quick. It's not my fault that you piqued my interest in something, even though I wanted to move on to another, you know what I mean? But I wanted to ask you, because you did have that talk with yourself, whether you were looking in the mirror or not, because I know you like to look at yourself in the mirror a lot, right? But when you had that talk, it's like, how many kids do you think are young men are mature enough, excuse me, I always say mature, That's because I grew up in the South. Mature enough to have that talk and have it a real, a real reality check. You know what I mean? I mean, because here's the thing you have to keep in mind, and I know you understand this, dude. When they were introducing those players last night, yeah, a few of them said they're high school or from Grand Valley, whatever, but most of them said their school. And like the Ohio State guys all said either the Ohio State or in Apple's case, he said Ohio State University. But my point is, you're where you the reputation you make in college follows you the rest of your life, and you can always go back there unless you left in bad standing, right? I mean, and I mean, you're from this area, but you know what I'm talking about. You got in real estate. I mean, blah blah blah. You're in the Big Ten Network. There are all kinds of things to parlay from college that don't necessarily follow you from the NFL unless you're a star, right?
So let's have that conversation, because I think that's one of those where you need mature people around you. You need mentors, because when you're 20, 21, 22 years old, I'm not exactly sure that you have the perspective to understand some of these things. But like I joke around as I say this, but it's true. I'm like, what do Braxton Miller and Cardale Jones do for a living? And the answer is they are Braxton Miller and Cardale Jones. Like that's exactly what they do. Coming back for me at Ohio State allowed me the opportunity to be at Big Ten Media Days, and I was one of the keynote speakers at that event. I did a ton of media that year, and I got on the radar for the Big Ten Network because of what I did just being a kid in college talking to the media. Yeah. And so that opened up a big opportunity for me. Being a national champion and a captain at Ohio State ended up allowing me to come back to Columbus and get into business with a little bit of a name after the NFL thing didn't go the way that I wanted it to. And like going back to Blake Corum, I think a big part of his paradigm is like, he wants to be able one day to go back to Ann Arbor and be Blake Corum for a living. And I think there's a lot of value to being somebody like that. So I think it's big, and especially when you're at a place like an Ohio State or Michigan, a Penn State, a USC, a LSU, Georgia, Alabama, like when you're attached to a blue blood prominent brand, you get to do those things, and that has to factor into the way that you make decisions. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. I think one of the barriers to that wisdom is at 21 years old, you got no perspective, and you think you have all the damn answers and you don't. And that's where some of the kids get caught up.
Yeah. And then when you hear the answer sort of you want to hear, that's the one you grasp on, right? I mean, that's natural. Yeah. Yep. I just remember, man, people kept asking me, CJ Stroud coming back, and I said, I could see why there's all these reasons why you don't, but I said I never ever presuppose until it comes out of that player's mouth or on his social media platform anymore that he's not coming back. Because I remember Joey Galloway. I wrote this big story the day Joey Galloway was going to make his announcement. It was in the Dispatch, and about all the reasons why he probably was going to leave, but then he didn't leave. And then I'll never forget at the end of the press conference, as I'm walking out, he goes, Tim May, I go, yeah. He goes, that was a really interesting story you had this morning. And he had just announced he's coming back. You know what I mean? So it's like, but one thing, it's really almost folly. And I say this because you only get one chance to play college football. Even now, even when guys are playing 6 years, you get one shot at it, and that's it. But it's a little bit of folly to make it all about chasing a national championship, isn't it? Or is it? I mean, you understand what I'm saying? I mean, what do you like you just pointed out? Are you chasing more your legacy? What are you chasing if indeed you decide to come back? I mean, some guys have. Tommy Eichenberg is coming back. Is Tommy Eichenberg going to get that much better in the pros' eyes than he was this year? Oh my goodness, he exploded onto the scene after who was this guy 2 years? Go ahead.
Tommy Eichenberg this year had the most tackles by an Ohio State player since Joshua Perry in 2014. That was the stat that I read. He's as close to his ceiling as you're going to be as a college player. I think part of why he would want to come back, yes, you're chasing a championship, but he's chasing Big Ten East supremacy. Like,
Oh yeah,
he wants to beat Michigan,
yeah,
and he wants to play in a Big Ten championship game. Like a lot of guys who have come through this building as of late have, right? So like, I
yeah.
think that's a part of what he wants to do there. I think for the national title conversation, and I keep bringing up Michigan, but it's interesting what's going on up there because they're in a window right now where they really feel like they're chasing a championship. Like they got the quarterback. Blake Corum came back, and then two of their offensive linemen came back.
Yeah.
I think Cornelius Johnson is back. They've got guys on defense, Michael Barrett, Mikey Samer still. Like those guys are all back, and they were really good players. You've got Will Johnson, who is a young cornerback who is going to be an All-American at some point, I think. You got Colston Loveland, who's a freshman tight end, who I think will probably win a Mackey Award at some point in his career. They've got guys, and so they feel like they're coming back in a championship window. I think for the Ohio State guys, it's always a championship window. Yeah. Every year has been a championship window, basically since Urban arrived. And there were many years before that where it was a championship window. And so it's a legacy play because you want to have gold pants and you want to have Big Ten championship rings being an Ohio State player. And so I think that's where the paradigm is. This chasing a national championship thing is tough because you'll let yourself down a lot of times thinking you're going to do that because it's really difficult to do. But there are a lot of other things that you can chase that I think make a lot of sense as a collegiate football player.
Yeah. And the segue is basically back to you. 2015 was a better football team, in my opinion, than 2014. Yep.
No doubt.
And it didn't happen, right? I mean,
didn't happen.
And so there's no guarantee in that regard. So you are rolling the dice no matter what you do, right?
Yeah. And like, here's the other thing too. And then I'll get off of this.
Yeah.
But like the Blake Corum situation in 2021, Hassan Haskins was the number one back. Beat Ohio State. He had like 5 touchdowns or whatever the case was. 2022 comes around. Yeah. He didn't play in the game. Beat Ohio State, made it to the college football playoff. There's a sense of wanting to be the reason why for some players. Like, can Tommy Eichenberg be the reason why Ohio State has a top 5 defense next year? I'm not exactly sure, but I bet you there's a little bit of that going through his mind. You know, like there are reasons for guys to say, I'm going to give it one final shot. Yeah. And a lot of it is their personal goals that end up being really impactful for the overall team. And I think that is huge for a lot of guys.
So what you're saying is you think Tommy Eichenberg is going to play cover corner for Ohio State this coming season?
You know, what I'm saying is I think Tommy Eichenberg is going to get his sack numbers up so the cover corners don't have to worry about it.
Bingo. Hey, real quick. Okay, you got a magic wand there. You're an Ohio State alum. I mean, you know, you left with a plum. I mean, you got a national championship, et cetera. What do you fix about this Ohio State defense? I mean, what just sticks in your craw about what you saw the last 2 games of this season, the Michigan game and the Georgia game? What sticks in your craw that has to be, because there were a lot of things that I think changed about this defense for the much better compared to the previous year. What's got to get fixed? I mean, you look at it from a more X and O's eye than I have, I'm sure. But what is it they've got to fix in that secondary? What's got to happen?
I think they got to develop better. It's hard for me to say that they have a personnel problem. Might not have been the greatest recruiting that's gone on. And I know a lot of guys in the cornerback room specifically have hopped in the portal over the last couple of seasons, but I think it needs to develop a lot more. And that's on the players and the coaches both to ensure that happens. And I've been in a position going back to 2013 where we had like solid players and we were not good on defense. We had to develop and we had guys emerge. Darren Lee emerged as a 3-star guy. Curtis Grant played his best football in 2014 and everybody thought that he was done, forgotten about. So you can develop. Like the narrative can change year over year, and we've seen it happen numerous times. I mean, going back to Tommy Eichenberg, some people thought he couldn't play linebacker at Ohio State, and all of a sudden the guy is, all-American caliber type of player. So I think the development has to be a key for the players on this defense. The other thing that I think is interesting is Jim Knowles' mentality as a defensive play caller. because he's going to take chances. He's a gambler by nature. I don't necessarily have a problem with the gambling. I like the game to be aggressive. But you go to the Penn State game, it's a third down, you go all out pressure, missed tackle on the edge, goes for a touchdown. You get to the Michigan game, it's a third down, you go all out pressure, you end up missing a tackle that goes for a long touchdown. You go to the Georgia game and you're sitting there toward the end of the game, critical drive. You want to go cover one man to man, and it's not a bad call. But then you look back and it's like, boy, if 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 a if a secondary player falls down in cover two, it's probably not a disaster. But if
Yeah.
they fall down in man to man, the worst thing that can happen happens. And so I think some of the play selection in terms of when you gamble, I think there can be a paradigm shift. I think the reason why they were as successful as they was and made some of those improvements is because of the aggression. So I'm not saying take all the aggression out of there. That would be foolish. But I think that there are also some opportunities, and it's just a matter of, you make the call or you don't, where, hey, let's just play a little bit more coverage on this one. Let's soften it up. And then, if it's 3rd and 7 and they throw it for 5 yards and we make a tackle, we're off the field. Instead of it's 3rd and 7, one guy misses a tackle and it's 88 and out the gate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's the other thought. Well, he'll make the play this time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, but that's coming from trusting your guys, which I certainly appreciate. And when you're aggressive like that, if you go from being really aggressive to all of a sudden playing it soft, as a player, I'm going to look at you and be like, you don't trust me anymore. And that's a tough spot to be in too. So I understand why a lot of these things happen, and you have to have the mentality that your guy is going to make the play. But you can also say, hey, listen, this ain't about you guys, and I don't think you're going to make the play. This is just about something that gives us a little bit more of a backstop and some security in this specific situation of the game, so we don't get the worst outcome.
But I think even the players would understand that. I mean,
For sure.
when you're on the field, I mean, Lathan Ransom said he's coming back to Ohio State for this season, and I go, that's a good move by him, because I think that guy's got tremendous upside. But boy, he had a couple of plays that aren't going to look good, to an NFL, that really cost you. I mean, really cost you. And I think to a certain extent was put in a tough situation. And of course, we saw Tommy Eichenberg going all the way down the field, covering a running back or whatever in that game, where sometimes you get that mismatch. But I don't understand that. I don't understand the scheme that puts players in that kind of situation. And we saw it before.
Let me get you this though, because I think this is where it's complicated and it's nuanced.
But wait a minute, let me make sure people understand what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Tuff Borland covering Devontae Smith down the field is the previous one I'm talking about. Go ahead though.
Yes. So you all right. You got your scheme, you got your system, you got your different coverages.
Yeah.
And every coverage has a weakness of sorts.
Yes.
And every offensive coordinator, and especially the ones at places like Alabama and Georgia, where they're really good coaches and they get paid a lot of money, understand exactly where to attack those weaknesses. So there's a way, if you're playing 3 deep, that you can isolate a linebacker on a number 3 wide receiver, because you're running 4 verts and there's an underneath coverage player that has to carry the vertical up the field. Now, as a defensive guy, and this is the Tuff Borland play, as a defensive guy, I'm rotating my coverage so that underneath player is a safety. We might be a little bit lighter in the box now because he might have to fill into an A or a B gap. But what I do know is I'm not going to get burnt over the top for the big one, because you got to cover an All-American wide receiver, right? Yeah. Like that's tough. But the moral of the story is these guys know how to attack coverages. As a defensive coordinator, you kind of have to have the answer to the way that they're going to want to attack. Number one, the Tommy Eichenberg one, it's the same thing. Like, you get verticals, you're playing a coverage that doesn't have 4 deep zones. Like, the only way you're not getting beat by 4 verts really is if you're playing cover 4, where you got your 2 corners and your 2 safeties carrying everything vertical. At some point, somebody's got to come off of underneath coverage, and then that's where you get the isolation. I think as a defensive coach, you're hoping for 2 things. Is number 1, they don't catch you in it, but number 2, if they got to throw that ball down the football field one of the safeties got to be able to get off of wherever they're at
Yeah.
and try to help you make the play down there. You
Yeah.
can't hardly put that on the linebacker. You got to say, whoever's playing safety, like, man, you got to get off the spot and give your boy some help.
Yeah.
He's playing trail technique, trying to carry. He can't run like that. And I've been there as a linebacker, and I could run a little bit, but I couldn't run like that.
Yeah.
And this is a hard, nuanced part about the game is like, sometimes you're just not in a great call.
Yeah.
And you need a guy to make a play. And then once you get back to the sideline, you just got to say, all right, here's the adjustment. Let's hope that we don't get in this situation again. But like, it's tough, man. This is why I'm not a coach, because I feel like I got a lot of answers for a lot of things, but I know out there I don't have all the answers. Yeah. I got all the answers when I'm sitting in the analyst booth, but I don't have all the answers when the game's going on.
Especially when you see the replay. I would have done this. Hey, real quick before you go, but I did want to say one thing. I took I call it a humorous cheap shot, though, at the defense. The last, matter of fact, even after the Michigan game, I go a defense that has three safeties on the field has no safety deep. You know what I mean? Type thing. When you really the whole key in that Georgia, those last two drives by Georgia was don't let them score a touchdown. Who cares if they get a 40-yard gain? Just but the one got them right back in the game. Hey, last thing.
But let me say on that one where Ransom fell down, though.
Yeah.
It's a similar type of situation as I evaluate it. Like, bro, falling down in coverage, probably one of the worst outcomes that you can have. Like, we need to make sure that doesn't happen. The flip side of that, though, is that safety who's playing in the middle of the field has to have the range to get from the wide side of the field where he's leaning all the way over to the other side to at least make the tackle on that play. And I know the guy who was playing wide receiver is a 10 flat 100-meter guy. Yeah. Like, that dude is fast.
Oh, yeah.
But the reason why you're playing deep is so you can have an angle to get off of your spot and get over there. And so those are all the things where I said that it needs to develop. I think schematically, another year is going to help them develop. But also from the player's standpoint, like whether it's your mechanics or whether it's just your awareness of the game of football, that development has to happen too. So you can make that tackle and it doesn't end up being the big play that it was. And so I think these guys are in a good spot, though. I trust Jim Knowles. I also trust the defensive staff that they have in terms of the coaches. I think that there's some really good coaches over there, but they have to find a way to get those guys developed into some of the players that we had seen when I was there, and even after I left, with some of the secondary players that they had. It was, cornerback and safety U for a while.
Yeah. And I had Matt Wilhelm on here a couple of weeks ago, and that's what we talked about is like, you got to have also those guys up front. You got to have somebody just become there were players who had some dominant moments and some couple of dominant games, but they didn't have that continual season of being, Nick Bosa off the edge, you know what I mean? Or Joey Bosa off the edge and stuff. Hey,
and that's what JT's got to be. And we saw what Mike Hall can do in spurts.
Yes.
Like, he's got to be that from the interior. So, like I said, I think they have the right pieces. It's just got to be a gradual, continual development process.
Hey, last thing, although I have two things, but I'm going to ask him. Number one, how would you like to be Cal McCord right now? He's already number 6 in the Heisman Trophy odds making, and he hasn't ever really played more than a quarter. Number one, so he's stepping into a great situation here. But then number two, I wanted to ask you, and so I will stay with my one question with an A and B part, but they're totally different. How will this service the defense with probably Ryan Day stepping back now and becoming more of a classic head coach so that he's not necessarily all involved with just the offense from a planning situation, et cetera? Do you think that will service his team well? But number one, Cal McCord has stepped into a great seat, right, if they find those 3 offensive linemen they're looking for.
I think the offensive line is going to be the biggest key in this. Kyle McCord, I have a lot of respect for because a lot of guys in his position just wouldn't have stayed around.
Yeah.
I've had conversations with his father offline too, and I know Kyle has been working diligently for this moment. And I'm not saying this to count out Devin Brown because I think he's very talented too.
Oh, yeah.
But what I am saying is that I think Ohio State has shown that they're going to be in a good spot at quarterback in the past. I think they're going to be as well. And specifically, as long as Ryan Day gets to talk to those young men, they'll be fine. They're also – whoever's playing quarterback is going to be thrown to Marvin Harrison Jr. and to Emeka Ibuka. Julian Fleming, Jaden Ballard.
Cade
You
Stover.
got Cade Stover coming back. Joe Royer is supposed to be ready to rock and roll. And then you've got Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams, Evan Pryor, Dallin Hayden, Xavier Johnson's coming back. Like, and some of these guys are
Chip
going to be
Trainum.
transfers.
Yeah.
It's too many guys.
Let me
so
interrupt
somebody's
you right there.
going to transfer.
Is it stunning how screwed up the running back room was at the end of this season? And now it's like, and it's knock on wood, people staying healthy, but it may be as stocked a running back room as there is in the country. And and that's with nobody new coming in.
It would be as loaded of a room as anybody would have. And so the quarterback is going to be fine as long as this offensive line develops the way that it needs to. Now, to your other question about Ryan Day, this is what is intriguing to me about all of this. Number one, from the offensive standpoint, I think that Brian Hartline has certainly earned an opportunity to be in this spot. Hell of a recruiter, hell of a developer. He's a guy that I know Ohio State wants to make sure is around for as long as they can keep him around. And so it's a natural progression for him to be more involved now and be an offensive coordinator. I would also like to see Tony Alford and Justin Fry be as involved in the development of the game plan and the actual play calling on game day as possible, because Ryan Day is a former quarterback guy who called plays, and then Brian Hartline's a former wide receiver who's coaching wide receivers, calling plays. I think you need to make sure that element of the run game is still heavily involved because of what I talked about with all the talent there at running back, but also with a young quarterback who doesn't have a lot of reps. You need to rely on that run game. So I think that's going to happen because they're all smart guys and they all work really well together. But I think that's something that needs to be ensured that happens. Flip side of that, Ryan Day, if he takes a step back, the best thing that happens is in the meeting room, where instead of being in the offensive meetings all day and they're drawing up plays and they're getting the game plan, he can go in the offensive meeting. He can give his thoughts. He can say, these are my must-haves, and then you guys can do the rest of the deal. And then he can go over in the defensive meeting room and he can say, okay, so this is what I see the opposing team's offense do. And then these are the things that I would do as a coordinator going up against our defense that fit into their paradigm. What are your answers for this? And he can help them develop answers because he has that offensive point of view in the defensive meeting room. I always said, if I got into coaching, I would coach offensive football because my understanding of defense would allow me to think through a lens of how to attack defenses from that standpoint and then have the answer when I see something that the defense comes up with. I would have a little bit of a feel for situations defensively, what my mentality was like, and then what was the biggest challenge an offense could present. And so I think Ryan spending more time with the defense allows him to use all of that offensive expertise to challenge the defense throughout the week to have answers. And that is super important. So I'm excited about this. I'm excited about all the collaboration that's going to be happening behind the scenes. And frankly, I think that every great coach has a point in their career where they say, I'm no longer the play caller. I am now the head coach. And Ryan understands that's a moment that he's into. I think he's as sharp as can be. And just the awareness that he has, whether it's instinctive or whether it's something that he's consciously thinking about, this is going to be a nice little mix up here.
Yeah, because I'm telling you, before you go, he had to be sitting there at one point there in the fourth quarter of that game against Georgia going, thinking to himself, I thought we fixed this. You know what I mean? I took this in for maintenance, the maintenance checkup between the Michigan game and now I thought this got fixed. You still got that thump in the back, that bothers you. And boy, that's not, we'll see how this works out. I think Jim Knowles will, it's better to get yelled at before than get yelled at after. You know what I mean? I would
100%.
Yeah.
All the challenging comes during the week. You don't want to be on game day feeling like you're getting challenged, so I think that's a big part of it is hash it all out, make the mistakes during the week and figure out what the answers are during the week. And I think that's exactly what they're going to do.
Hey, real quick before we go, I know I said that, but I'm sorry I kept you so long. Number one, does the Big Ten East, does it change at all this coming year? Is it still Ohio State or Michigan? and Penn State. I mean, what's your take? And number two in the West, Matt Rule's a hell of a college football coach. I don't care what he
Yep.
did at Carolina, and I'm talking about Carolina as a pro, team. He's a hell of a football coach. Luke Fickell's a hell of a football coach. Did the Big Ten West get shaken up pretty big in this offseason by these new hires?
Yeah, man. The East, it's Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, and I think Michigan is going to be the favorite to win the East coming in, as they should be with all they have returning and what they've done over the last 2 years. Ohio State's going to be in great position. Penn State's the one that I'm really looking at because they've got the two young running backs who are going to be really good. They've got the quarterback Drew Aller, who a lot of people are high on. I think he's going to be a good player. Manny Diaz made that defense a lot better in year one, and I think it's going to take another step in year two. Abdul Carter on that defense is really good. You're replacing a Joey Porter. You're replacing a Jair Brown. I think those guys are really good players, but they've recruited the type of secondary players that you want to see over there. So I think they're going to be really good. In the West, what Luke Fickell right now, what he's doing in the portal in some of the recruiting and the way he's building his staff, my
Oh,
God.
yeah, dude. His staff. Go ahead. I didn't think he had that in him. I mean,
yeah,
I'm surprised. He's done his homework. Go ahead.
He's done all of his homework. He's got it in him, man. Luke is one of the people that I respect most in college football. Obviously, my personal relationship and what he's done for me.
Yeah.
I tell this story now when I talk about him, but when it was 2018, during that offseason, Luke was like, I don't know what your football career is going to pan out like, but when you're done, I want you to come work with me. And so basically, I knew as soon as I was done playing football, I was always going to have a job because Luke Fickell was somebody who was willing to invest in my future the way he had done for 4 years when I was a player. And I think that is why he's able to recruit the way that he does, but also why he is able to put together that staff. He's investing in all of those guys so they can be elite coaches.
Yeah.
And he wants to change everything that's going on. And
Yeah.
so you got Luke. Matt Rule, as you mentioned, I think he's going to be great for Nebraska. And then you really start to dig into it. Brett Bielema, phenomenal football coach. This guy is ridiculous. And then you've got, the Kirk Ferentzes of the world who can just flat coach football. And whether the offense is kind of icky, they got an identity and a mentality. PJ Fleck is a guy who gets made fun of a lot. That guy knows how to coach some ball.
Yep.
He runs some of the best practices I've ever gotten to watch. He's very organized. He knows how to communicate well with players. He's very detailed. Like, the West has really taken a big step up, and I'm excited to see what it actually looks like.
Hey, this is the very last thing. I've said this a million times. I may have said it to you. This idea of going to no divisions in the Big Ten. If you're in the Big Ten West right now and you're an administrator, why would you vote for that? Why would you say, yeah, I want to see Ohio State and Michigan play back-to-back weekends, first in their grudge match and then for the Big Ten championship? I would not want to. I mean, that would take me totally out of the equation, at least to begin with, and stuff. Why would you vote for that?
I'd fight it 100% of the way. I personally, as a viewer, I think it needs to happen because what I want to see is the two best teams playing for the conference championship. And this is not a knock on some of the teams who've come out of the West. I don't need to see it.
Yeah.
But if I'm a team from the West, I'm advocating for my programs and for their opportunity, especially in the new college football playoff where you get an auto bid for winning a conference championship as long as you're one of the highest ranked conference champs, which would certainly happen in the Big Ten. I am advocating for that situation because think about this. So
I'm with you.
Let's say Purdue would have won the Big Ten championship this past year. Yeah. I'm sure they would have been in the top 25 for the CFP or whatever the case is. So now, they're one of the top 6 highest ranked conference champs. Then Ohio State and Michigan are sitting right there.
Yeah.
And then, is Penn State in the spot where they can sneak in the 12 seed or whatever the case is? So now we're talking about 4 teams from the Big Ten that make it in. Yeah. So that's what I would be proposing if I was one of the decision makers over there in the West. Like, this ain't all bad. Like, maybe we don't get the greatest Big Ten championship game, but we give ourselves an opportunity to have as many teams in that college football playoff pool as possible And that's what becomes intriguing in that equation.
Hey, see what I'm doing?
Yes. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joshua Perry, thank you for joining the Tim May podcast again. Thank you for being my co-pilot. Thank you for not hitting the wrong buttons at the wrong time, but hitting the right buttons at the right time. And I appreciate you. You know that, right?
No doubt. Appreciate you too.
And ladies and gentlemen, Tim May podcast. Until next week, we'll see you then.